I want to express some interesting thoughts which are highly experimental, though it makes sense for me to capture them. The most important, not is not the most important, it is important to point out that I think that the Second World War has never ended. I think the Second World War was pushed, well, it stopped in a sense, but many issues related to this were pushed under the rug, and actually the rug is Middle East. Okay, so I start this thought capturing process by claiming that the Second World War has not ended. So the Second World War shifted, or the momentum, the conflict momentum shifted from Europe to the Middle East. Because of the situation in Europe and the highly nationalistic character of Europe, as perceived by a lot of people, so people say that Europe cannot assimilate any type of um, newcomers for a period of several hundred years, etc. So the war shifted to Middle East. Israel had to be instituted there, although Jewish people have a highly um, have been highly influenced by and have had a great influence in Europe and the European identity. So I think that the contribution of Jewish culture to Europe has been extremely important. And to classify them as non-Europeans is highly problematic, in my opinion. So Europe is not just a geographical uh, um, that does not have only geographical character. Who has authority to define European culture, and by what means? So I want to remind you that Europe was a very beautiful girl that did not like Zeus, who had flirted with her. He turned into a bull and raped her. So who has the authority to define European culture? Anyway, in my opinion, Europe should recognize the contribution of Jewish civilization or whatever to Europe. So the Middle Eastern war is no longer fought. So as the Second World War has been succeeded by a new war type of war, it is being fought by Arab people, the people of Israel or Jewish people in Israel, etc. United States, Russia. So Germany, for example, does not have any responsibility in this war, although it is highly responsible for what is happening in the Middle East. And Germany is again trying to destabilize Europe. with Greece standing its ground there. However, Europe and the caressing it has enjoyed from both United States, especially the United States and Russia, has stabilized. Though now this is not longer necessarily true. However, it has managed to find stability. Although some of the real problems were related to the Second World War, um, for which Europe was responsible, have shifted to the Middle East, Europe has enjoyed stability. And actually, although Greece is carrying the burden of the whole situation, actually Greece is standing its ground, I think. So anyway, I like to think, furthermore, the UK, Britain and UK, whatever, has not left the European Union yet. It has expressed interest to leave the European Union. So this is important to think about. So anyway, Europe has enjoyed stability and growth. But the United States and Russia, and I do like Russia a lot in general, although I don't like the hierarchical organization of Russia, although maybe this is necessary to hold such a big country. In It's not very easy, but I don't like that. But I have a lot of keen. I like a lot Russian culture and its contribution to the world and Europe, etc. So anyway, there is some singularity in the Middle East that has remained after the Second World War, and the United States and Russia are being pitted against each other by some interests which don't think are even human, by some situation that is not necessarily from humans, but some weird like situations that are happening. So, so what is my point? So my point is that I think Europe should assume responsibility in the Middle East. Europe. So it has enjoyed the benefits of a stabilizing situation, and now it must assume responsibility to actually remove the singularity it has created and shift it to the Middle East. Okay. In my opinion, Israel would like to join the European Union if it is invited to do so. Should Europe be positive to such a situation, it will have a stabilizing effect in the Middle East. I think that the war in Syria has a lot to do with Israel to protect um, Turkey, Cyprus, and Israel, mostly. In my humble opinion, I'm not very well versed in the politics of that area, but that's my hunch. So I think Israel should assume responsibility to stabilize the Middle East, and Europe should assume responsibility to back up Israel in this effort. So it would be wrong to think that Israel is pitting Russia and the United States against each other to fight the war in Syria. It is a false scheme, although one tends to actually think it may be true, but it's not, I think. However, we should invert the role of Israel in the area from a destabilization effect to a stabilizing effect. I think Israel would be happy to assume such a role, but Europe cannot hold the position that Israel is Middle Eastern, whatever, a foreign, I don't know. So Israel was created because of Germany. And I don't want to say Nazi Germany. It's Germany that did that. Not Nazi Germany. It was Nazi Germany, but it was actually Germany. So I don't think that Europe is Germany, by the way. obviously. It seems they want to have a leadership role in Europe, so they should assume it if they want in this case. But my point is the following: Europe should assume responsibility for the situation in the Middle East. It is not the United States' responsibility or Russia's responsibility necessarily. I have to put a question mark on Russia. I don't know exactly what's going on there. I have no idea. But from the perspective, at least, of the United States, it's not the United States that should be supporting Israel. It is Europe that should actually assume responsibility in the area. On the positive side, it's going to have a, if Europe does a good job there, it will have a very positive influence in the Middle East. And in fact, start thinking about the Crusades and how they have been screwing it up persistently throughout the centuries. So it is in fact interesting that Bush wanted to do another crusade to the Middle East. It's, it was a highly problematic thing to even think about, but he wanted to take responsibility for Europe to do that. Although it shouldn't be the United States' responsibility to do another crusade. But he even said that I will become Europe. So, although I don't like that Bush said I'm going to do a crusade, now that I'm saying this, I actually start liking what he said. He didn't know what to do, right? He didn't know what to do. But he said, I'm going to assume Europe's role, in a sense, like highly subconscious, whatever way. So, I think that actually Europe should assume responsibility in the Middle East. So, in my opinion, trying to understand what's going on in Syria, and the refugees are coming to Greece, and I'm worried about this because Greece does not have the financial resources to handle all these refugees. So Europe as an entity should assume responsibility in the Middle East. It doesn't have an army, although it's not clear. And Europe should back up Israel's role in the Middle East. I don't like the fact I'm saying should and should and should. I'm just thinking loudly. Okay. But it makes sense to me that this makes sense. Over the next few days, I will try to investigate more what's going on with the war in Syria. But today I try to think loudly, a blueprint that makes sense to me. So to summarize, I think the war in Syria would be significantly different under the condition. So the problem with the war in Syria is that the status quo is like highly harmful. We should change the status quo in the area if we want to have a positive influence in Syria and the refugee crisis and all the woes of the Middle East. How should the status quo change? In thinking about this question, I created in my mind the thoughts I talked about today, and I will try to think about it more.